Hey guys, in today's video I'm going to compare and contrast Jean-Claude Van Damme's original Sudden Death with the new Michael J. White one that came out, Welcome to Sudden Death. It's going to be hard, but I'm going to try to be as nice as I can. But instead of giving me an A for effort, how about just clicking that likes button for the effort, and I hope you enjoy this video. First, we got to talk about the title. The original Sudden Death took place during Game 7 of the NHL Stanley Cup Finals, and the term sudden death is used when a hockey game goes into overtime and the first goal scored will end the game. Of course, in the film it has a dual meaning because a terrorist who took over the owner's box and held the vice president, among others, hostage, announced that they would blow up the building at the end of the game. In Welcome to Sudden Death, the film takes place during the season opener of a basketball game, so there's not a direct correlation with the title. Also, the basketball team is fictitious, the Phoenix Falcons. It would have been nice if the producers were able to work with the NBA and secure a real basketball team. However, being a lower budget production, I'm not even sure if they tried to pursue that option. The original Sudden Death greatly benefited from having a much higher budget, and one of the producers of that film, Howard Baldwin, happened to own the Pittsburgh Penguins at the time. Van Damme's Sudden Death handled the subject matter in a much more serious tone than Michael J. White's remake, which handled it in a lighthearted, somewhat comedic, though inconsistent way, which I'll talk about more later when I elaborate on the tone of each film. Interestingly, the first draft of the original Sudden Death screenplay was a comedy action movie parody. The only scene that ended up remaining in the finished film was a scene where Van Damme fights the Penguin mascot. Ironically, the new film would end up playing like a comedy action movie parody, but would omit one of the most memorable scenes from the original, the protagonist fighting a mascot. Speaking of scenes in the film, there are certainly some that are pretty much direct carbon copies. For example, when one of the terrorists knows about the main character's son and tries to get him to come along with them to go sit in the owner's box. But unfortunately, it seems the best scenes from the original film are all missing from the remake. I already mentioned the fighting of the mascot, but there's also a sequence in the original Sudden Death where Van Damme's character ends up in a hockey game, playing a goalie, and makes the play of the night. Which, as cool as that is, it also acts as an important element for the character as that scene gains him back the respect of his son. Now, of course, since the goalie's face is covered up in a hockey mask, it makes sense and is a lot easier to incorporate Van Damme's character into the hockey game. But Welcome to Sudden Death is played in such a cheesy, unrealistic manner that I don't think it'd be too much to ask the audience to suspend their disbelief if the writers were able to incorporate Michael J. White into the basketball game. For example, instead of the running joke in the movie about how nice his kids look compared to him.
Got some good looking kids there, Freeman. Are they yours?
Why is everybody so amazed that I have good looking kids? I mean, what am I, a troll?
Perhaps have them comment on how much Michael J. White's character looks like one of the basketball players, who supposedly is going to miss the game and make it seem as if he does end up arriving later to briefly play in the game. Yeah, it's a dumb idea, but trust me, it's no dumber than the rest of the movie, and at least it'd be entertaining to see Michael J. White on the basketball court. Another scene that was omitted was one that the TV spot marketing campaign for the original film pretty much wrote on. This sequence with Van Damme's character fighting one of the baddies in the upper rafters was pretty cool, and gave the audience a good feel for the epic scale of everything. It was analogous to the type of threat a single man would face if pitted against a group of heavily armed terrorists. This all led into the final confrontation when Van Damme's character finally breaches the owner's box, which is a scene they kept in Welcome to Sudden Death. However, there was no lead up to it. Michael J. White just magically appeared and crashed into the owner's box. It's worth noting that the original film had a runtime of an hour and 50 minutes, while the remake clocked in at only an hour and 20 minutes, a full 30 minutes shorter. However, having much less time to tell the story, the remake lacked any sort of urgency in telling it, which is in stark contrast with the original. They set the tone right away with letting us know exactly how important time was, with everything culminating into the sudden death period. As far as the story and scenes go, although Welcome to Sudden Death is a remake, it doesn't add anything new. Instead, it takes so much away. Peter Hyams shot and directed the original Sudden Death, though he wasn't interested in making the film when he first heard about it, thinking it was a lame idea for an action film. After Van Damme accepted the lead role, which by the way was first offered to Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, and Bruce Willis, Van Damme was able to recruit Hyams after sharing some of his ideas for the film. The two men had previously worked together on the sci-fi action or Time Cop, and would go on to work together with Enemies Closer much later in 2013. Overall, Peter Hyams had a lot of hits and misses in his career, which started all the way back in 1972, so he was very experienced and skilled as both a director as well as a cinematographer by the time he shot Sudden Death. Dallas Jackson, on the other hand, who directed Welcome to Sudden Death, has only previously directed one other film, 2018's Thriller. The synopsis of that one is, a childhood prank comes back to haunt a clique of South Central Los Angeles teens when their victim returns home during their high school homecoming weekend. So overall, he doesn't have much experience as a director, and no experience in the action genre. Although Welcome to Sudden Death is definitely not your typical action movie, I'm not sure exactly what it truly knows what it wants to be and suffers from an identity crisis as a result. It's part comedy, though not very funny, part martial arts, part action, part kids movie, though rated R. In fact, one of the reviews on IMDb summed it up perfectly: an R-rated movie for kids. The tone is just too inconsistent. The lightheartedness and cheesiness of the film kind of reminded me of Vin Diesel's The Pacifier, but one reason why that film worked better than Welcome to Sudden Death is because it knew what it was. It was geared towards kids from the start, hence the PG rating. Whereas Welcome to Sudden Death has that kids movie feel, but it's rated R, so there are just enough scenes in it to not make it suitable for children, but it's handled in such a manner that it's a turnoff for adult audiences. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about if you watch it, by the way.
Yo, that is one crazy bitch!
But going back to The Pacifier, since I brought that movie up, and even Welcome to Sudden Death, you know what the real problem is? It's basically what they didn't do, which is something that made Kindergarten Cop with Arnold Schwarzenegger work so well. The stark contrast between the beginning of Kindergarten Cop, which opens like the typical R-rated Arnold Schwarzenegger film, juxtaposed with the remainder of the film when he becomes a kindergarten teacher. So we see and experience his world, the one he's used to, which is full of criminal scum. So when he's thrust into the classroom as a kindergarten teacher, undercover of course, the comedic element just really works as he now struggles with and has to deal with bratty kids, which for him is actually a lot more difficult. The Pacifier with Vin Diesel had a lot of potential, but it just came across as cheesy from the onset, but at least it kept that tone and it knew what it was trying to be, more catered towards kids, whereas Welcome to Sudden Death suffers from an identity crisis in more ways than one. For example, it's really hard for the audience to take the main villain serious if the girl playing Michael J. White's daughter can't even take the main villain serious.
I can see why, loser.
And why should we? Compare it to this scene in the original.
And your father's name?
It's McCord too.
Would you like it if I filled your little mouth with spiders? What's his whole name?
Darren Francis Thomas McCord.
Thank you.
But the biggest problem I have with this is that the main villain himself plays a part in a very serious way once we find out his true motivation for taking hostages. There's no way this character played this way.
Destruction of my life, including my family, and destroying the lives of my team.
Should be in the same movie as Gus, the janitor in the film, played this way.
Hell no!
The tone is just too inconsistent, and it's really my biggest knock on Welcome to Sudden Death. As far as the main character goes, Michael J. White plays Jesse Freeman, an ex-combat veteran suffering from PTSD, who now works as a security guard for a Phoenix basketball team. Not that that exactly matters though, since he tends to play everything exactly the same. He's got a naturally deep voice, but I feel as if in all his movies he tries to go even deeper,
making it sound less natural and more like he's actually reciting lines as opposed to just naturally speaking them.
You see how unnatural that sounds? But that doesn't mean he shouldn't be cast in a much better movie, because he still has a star quality and good screen presence. As far as Jean-Claude Van Damme goes, he actually puts a lot more effort in creating his characters and makes them more unique. For example, Chad and Alex in Devil Impact, Chance Boudreaux on Hard Target, and Darren McCord in Sudden Death. At the beginning of the original Sudden Death, Van Damme's character works as a fireman and is traumatized because of his failure to save a young girl. The main story opens 2 years later when he's divorced and working as a safety inspector at the stadium. It's a much safer, though less prestigious position, at least in his son's
Why, is there
eyes.
a light bulb that needs changing? You take that back! Daddy's a fireman! He's too scared to be a fireman.
From a plot and storytelling perspective, in the original Sudden Death, we have what feels like a real character here with a chance at redemption. If he can manage to not only save his own daughter, but the rest of the fans at the hockey stadium, also gain back the respect of his son. The remake really misses an opportunity here in trying to elevate Michael J. White to playing a character we can try and empathize with. The divorce element is taken away, and this is really probably due to one of two things here. One, either just lazy writing, or two, a much more conscious decision. Single-family homes are an unfortunate stereotype of the black community, at least in more urban areas, and I don't think portraying that in film, especially one with a more lighthearted tone, would necessarily be a good thing. Perception goes a long way, whether in film or music, and Wesley Snipes actually made some interesting comments as far as why he didn't even want to portray a drug dealer in some of his movies like New Jack City and Sugar Hill.
But actually, I turned the film down a couple of times when they first approached me, because that wasn't where my head was at. You know, I didn't feel that was where our people needed to be at. And we had enough images of us being drug dealers and degenerates and unhumanly. I didn't want to contribute to that.
So there's a level of being socially conscious. The director did one other film I mentioned earlier, and it had a pretty scathing review on IMDb stating, "Every character in this movie is utterly detestable. It does not shine a particularly positive light on the black community, and in the end I was kind of upset more the cast weren't murdered." So maybe the director took that to heart, just a theory, probably overthinking it, but at least I'm putting some real effort into this video, which is more than I can say for the filmmakers who made Welcome to Sudden Death. So I at least hope that was the motivation. Otherwise, it really misses an opportunity in trying to create a more complex, real, and damaged character, as opposed to a character that seems to come across more as a superhero. In general, I like to be more positive on this channel, but if a movie is not good, I gotta be honest. The type of welcome the viewing experience gave me felt more like what one of Van Damme's adversaries said in the 90s.
Welcome to hell!
If you've been following the channel, you probably know I'm a huge Jean-Claude Van Damme fan, by the way. But even I'll admit, some of his movies are garbage. The original Sudden Death is anything but. In fact, although it got mixed reviews at the time of its release, retrospective reviews have been more positive and is seen by many as one of Van Damme's best, usually cracking the top 10 on several lists. Welcome to Sudden Death, on the other hand, is so bad it's derailed. That's a direct reference to the Van Damme film Derailed, which I consider his worst. So anytime I say something is so bad it's derailed, or it's so bad it's Bloodsport 4 The Dark Kumite, you pretty much know it's utter garbage. As far as the supporting cast goes, the villain is usually the one that steals the show, so having a strong villain is necessary in order to have a strong movie. Powers Booth played a great villain in the original Sudden Death. He's most known for his role in Deadwood and has also appeared alongside Kurt Russell and Val Kilmer in Tombstone, as well as the late Brandon Lee in Rapid Fire. He's really a great actor overall. Michael Eklund plays the villain in the remake. He's got a pretty extensive filmography going all the way back to 2000, but I personally haven't seen him in anything. Regardless, he is no Powers Booth. In the original Sudden Death, Dorian Harewood played Agent Hallmark.
Hallmark? Well, I see they care enough to send their very best.
Gee, I never heard that one before.
He's just a good solid actor, and it was nice to see Van Damme surrounded by a strong supporting cast. The closest equivalent you could get to him in the remake would be Maurice Crump, since they share the same scene in both films. And while Maurice Crump wouldn't quite have the acting chops of Dorian Harewood, it makes sense why they would cast him in the remake. His martial arts background. He's got an extensive background in Muay Thai, Capoeira, boxing, Taekwondo, and Filipino martial arts. He's actually the only American protege of Master Pana Ritkari, the head of the Muay Thai stunt team and writer and fight choreographer of Tony Jaa's Ong Bak. For years, Crump traveled from America to Bangkok, Thailand to study as his direct student. Crump himself was the martial arts trainer for the late Chadwick Boseman for Black Panther. He puts up a good fight scene against Michael J. White in Welcome to Sudden Death, and even shows off some of his capoeira skills. I have a feeling we'll probably be seeing a lot more of him in the future. Speaking of which, he's next slated to appear in the film Jiu-Jitsu alongside Nicolas Cage, Tony Jaa, and Alain Moussai. Another really notable co-star in Welcome to Sudden Death, and someone they even used in the film's marketing, would be Michael J. White's wife, Gillian White. The really memorable thing about her here is that she actually ends up fighting Michael J. White's character in the film. Speaking of the fights and action overall, they set the remake up a lot more to be a martial arts film than the original, with pre-fight mini-katas you typically see in a video game prior to the fight, and even 3-on-1 battles. The original Sudden Death had much more impactful fighting, which is more Van Damme style, even though the fighting in Sudden Death isn't what you'd usually get in a Van Damme film. For example, there's no helicopter kicks or anything. There is this nice drop kick here though. I actually like the fight scenes better in the original Sudden Death over the remake. They were more visceral and overall better portrayed the sense of danger our hero was facing. If you go strictly by a martial arts perspective, then the remake would get the nod, but bear in mind, the subgenre of the original Sudden Death shouldn't even be classified as a martial arts film, whereas the remake would definitely fit the bill. From an action perspective, there's no comparison between the two films, and a lot of that has to do with the much smaller budget Welcome to Sudden Death had. Referring to the original, Kevin Thomas of the Los Angeles Times called it a treat for Jean-Claude Van Damme fans, a superior action thriller loaded with jaw-dropping stunts and special effects, and strong in production values. For example, in one of the stunts in the original film, they had 18 stunt people in front of a door, who then got swept off their feet right into the camera by 2,000 gallons of water rigged to be poured down the pedestrian ramp inside the arena. Another stunt had them hang a full-size Jet Ranger helicopter from the largest mobile crane in the United States, weighing 1,100 tons with a 400-foot reach. It had to fall 170 feet through an opening in the roof of the Civic Arena. That's the kind of scene and spectacle that really works well on the big screen in the theater. So budget aside, it makes sense why they wouldn't even try and attempt something like that for a made-for-video streaming market. There were a lot of people and effort involved in the original production. Speaking of effort, or rather lack thereof, even within the story in Welcome to Sudden Death, the team of terrorists exhibited very little effort in taking over the stadium, which is pretty much the perfect analogy with the amount of effort the filmmakers must have put forth in making this film.
We got the Wi-Fi tech crew here. Stand them up. Copy that.
Contrast that with what the terrorists had to go through in the original film to take over the stadium. The traffic stop, the murder and theft of security badges, the kidnapping of the cook's wife that helped the terrorists gain access to the owner's box. It was really a whole production, much like the original film. And one last thing related to effort, I found this article from Forbes amusing. It says, a Michael J. White remake of a Van Damme bomb is now one of Netflix's most watched movies. I wouldn't necessarily call Sudden Death a bomb, though it did underperform, grossing $64 million on a $35 million budget. A sequel to the original film had been written and was planned for a fall 1997 release, but after the film underperformed at the box office, the project was scrapped. But the title of the article alone makes it sound as if nobody watched Van Damme's movie and everybody watched Michael J. White's. Think of the effort involved. You'd literally have to drive to the theater and pay money to see Van Damme's in the 90s, whereas with the remake, who doesn't have Netflix or at least isn't using their friends or family's account? So you're really not paying anything since you already have Netflix and you're simply clicking a button to watch it because let's face it, there aren't a whole lot of other movies to watch on Netflix. There's a ton of TV shows, documentaries, and comedy specials, but not a whole lot of movies. But with that said, at least people are watching it, so good for Michael J. White for getting the audience, though sadly if someone is newly exposed to Michael J. White because of this film, well, it's not exactly the best first impression. There is something else that really bugged me from that Forbes article though, and it leads to an even bigger discussion in general. It says, like Fatal Affair back in July, Welcome to Sudden Death is a classic example of an old school 1990s genre flicks remade, revamped for black actors and actresses who didn't get to star in these movies when they were considered A-level studio releases. Yes, it's as formulaic a die-hard movie as you can imagine, but that it stars a guy who looks like Michael J. White instead of a guy who looks like Gerard Butler makes it new and special to demographics who used to sit on the sidelines while Rambo and McClane saved the day. Has this writer never heard of Passenger 57 with Wesley Snipes? Has he not known Denzel Washington saved the day several times in A-level studio films during that era and beyond? But since he wants to discount Wesley Snipes and Denzel Washington and make a point of needing more diversity as far as who gets to play the leading man, that's fine. But then I'd like to see the door opened even wider, because as much as the mainstream media likes to paint the world as being black and white, it's really just a big gray area, full of black, white, and the often forgotten everything in between. For example, I've covered Philip Brie on a separate video, and he really kind of got the short end of the stick based on his race as being Asian and not having any opportunities in Hollywood in the 90s after Best of the Best. 25-30 years later, very little has changed, and even in 2020, it still primarily seems if a man is of Middle Eastern descent, he's usually still playing the role of a terrorist. Why can't he be the hero? Why can't he be a lover of America and the hero in a story, but in a story that's not even necessarily written with a Middle Eastern guy in mind, but just happens to have that background and happens to look that way? Because at the end of the day, if there's thought and effort put into developing a character in a well-written script, the audience is going to like it. If Wesley Snipes happened to play John McClane, people would still love Die Hard. If Sylvester Stallone happened to be Passenger 57, it'd still be a great movie. So you could take the component of race out of it. What I'd like to see Michael J. White star in is a movie conceptualized from its inception as just being a good movie from a solid original script where it doesn't matter what race the main protagonist is. Because in any profession, sport, or activity, take a look around. There's such a diverse looking background of people participating in it and being part of it, and there's no reason why any one of them couldn't be the center of a story taking place in that environment. Instead, in Welcome to Sudden Death, Michael J. White has been relegated to a low-budget, cheesy, urbanized remake of a movie from the 90s, and if you stayed and watched the end credits, they're even setting up a sequel.
The security guard said there are 3 bodies in here.
A sequel to a remake. Can we get any further from having an original idea? Being that it's 2020, I guess that's far too much to ask. And as a counter-argument, which I'm sure someone will point out in the comments section anyway, sometimes a character's race is actually an important component to certain stories, and it makes sense that parts should be cast in such a way. For example, Black Panther and Mulan come to mind. But it's really not relevant to the vast majority of stories, although I guess the casting department just never got the memo. But overall, I at least thought Welcome to Sudden Death was better than Hard Target 2 with Scott Adkins, but that's mainly because of how little I think of Hard Target 2. If there's one thing these movies both accomplish, it's this. Whoever revisits the original Van Damme films from the 90s, either Sudden Death or Hard Target, they'll end up having so much more appreciation for them now. The phrase, they don't make them like they used to, has never been more true. Anyway, let me know in the comments section, what did you guys think about Welcome to Sudden Death? Am I being too harsh? Am I not harsh enough? How do you think the original was in comparison? Let me know.